opportunities for Peru and Singapore. I'm honored to be your host for this event and look forward to facilitating an engaging session. And my name is Hock Chai from Singapore Business Federation. So before we dive into presentation discussions today, let me give a brief overview of our agenda. We'll begin with the welcome remarks by Mr. Jason Lee, Director, Singapore Business Federation, followed by 3 informative presentations. The topics to be covered are identifying opportunities in Peru, sharing on Peru-Singapore Free Trade Agreement and CPTPP, recent developments in the Pacific Alliance, Singapore FTA, and Joint Work Plan. Following these presentations, we will have a Q&A session allowing you to engage with our speakers and address any queries or insights you may have regarding the opportunities in both Peru and Singapore. So let's proceed to introduce our first esteemed speaker, Mr. Jason Lee, who will provide our welcome remarks. Jason, please.
Thank you, Hock Chai. Mr. Carlos Posada, Institutional Director of the Lima Chamber of Commerce, our partners at the Ministry of Trade and Industry Singapore, members and friends of SBF, ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to this webinar on unlocking opportunities between Peru and Singapore. We are delighted that Singapore businesses across a diverse range of industry sectors have registered to join us today as we discuss opportunities and significant developments in Peru. We hope today's webinar will leave you with some thoughts on how to start or grow your business links with Peru. There is indeed enormous potential in the Peru-Singapore bilateral economic relationship. Despite being separated by the Pacific Ocean, both countries are very similar in their strong commitment to fostering economic partnerships globally and creating a conducive domestic environment where businesses can thrive. There are a number of agreements between Peru and Singapore and numerous collaborations and intergovernmental platforms to promote mutual economic growth and prosperity. In addition to the Peru-Singapore Free Trade Agreement signed in 2008, Peru is also a member of the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, or the CPTPP for short, the gold standard of free trade agreements and a key pathway agreement towards the vision of a free trade area of the Asia-Pacific. More recently, Peru has also taken the lead among the 4 Latin American nations in the Pacific Alliance bloc by ratifying the Pacific Alliance-Singapore Free Trade Agreement. The Pacific Alliance, which has a combined population of 230 million people and a large growing middle class, represents a huge opportunity for consumer goods and services. Being its first associate member will put Singapore in a great position to benefit from this growth. If you look at today's figures, total trade volume between Singapore and Peru was 129 million Singapore dollars last year, with Singapore imports from Peru making up a smaller fraction at less than $45 million compared to exports to Peru of over $83 million. There is definitely much room to grow for both figures. In this dynamic and geopolitically challenging trade landscape, it is crucial for businesses to diversify and identify new opportunities for both supply and sales. The shared values between Peru and Singapore in free and open trade, underpinned by a predictable and facilitative regulatory environment, regional economic cooperation, and having businesses at the core of prosperity can uncover many opportunities. I encourage everyone to actively participate in today's discussions, raise any doubts you may have to the speakers, and follow up with my team to explore how they can assist you with free trade agreements or to identify partners in Peru. Thank you once again for joining us for this webinar, and we look forward to a productive and engaging morning.
Thank you, Jason, for the welcome remarks. We'll now proceed to introduce Mr. Carlos Posada, who is our next speaker. A brief overview of Mr. Carlos Posada. Mr. Carlos Posada is currently serving as the Institutional Director and Executive Director of IndexCam at the Lima Chamber of Commerce. Mr. Posada brings a wealth of experience to this role. Previously, he held the esteemed position of Vice Minister for Foreign Trade of Peru from 2010 to 2013. In this capacity, he played a pivotal role in shaping Peru's international trade relations. Mr. Posada's distinguished career also includes serving as the National Director of Asia-Oceania Relations from 2009 to 2010, where he further honed his expertise in foreign affairs. He has been the chief negotiator for several significant free trade agreements, including those between Peru and Japan, South Korea, and Chile. Mr. Posada served as the National Superintendent of Customs of Peru from 2008 to 2009 and is a founding member of the Peruvian Customs Law Association. Additionally, he is a respected member of the Customs and International Trade Bar Association. As a member of the Board of Directors of the World Trade of Cities and Logistics Platforms from 2020 to 2022, Mr. Posada's expertise covers a wide range of specialties, including public policy, foreign trade, customs law, international procedures, and trade negotiations. But let us proceed with our first presentation on identifying opportunities in Peru. Mr. Posada, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your kind words. And first of all, I would like to thank to all the organizers, Singapore Business Federation, MTI, Peruvian Embassy, Enterprise Singapore, and of course, the speakers we will have this evening for me and morning for you. And of course, I'm very delighted to share some kind of important information between the relations and the opportunities that we can have between, Singapore and Peru. Please let me know if I'm sharing correctly my presentation, if it's working correctly.
Yes, it's correct. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Well, I would like to start saying that, the relations between Singapore and Peru has been very, very fruitful in the last years. I'm going to refer mainly, on the 2022, where Peru, cemented its role as a major exporter powerhouse in South America, recording 4%, of the, let's say, growth and achieving a very important position, in the region. Peru also holds a significant position as the 6th largest supplier in Singapore within the South American context, particularly, giving Singapore's global stature as a financial hub. We consider that Singapore has been a key role player in the region for the exports of Peru in the Asian countries. We have seen that in the last years, Peru has grown a lot in terms of what we have tried to focus on certain products to be more important country, not only in the northern region of America, but also in Europe and in Asia. And we have seen that the synergy between Peru growing export sectors and Singapore global influence offers, a lot of increased bilateral trade and cooperation. These opportunities lie in technology transfer, supply chain integration, financial partnerships, and substantial initiatives. The future may even see the development of a free trade agreement enhancing trade relations on mutual benefits. And as we enter in 2023, it's a 14-year-old free trade agreement between Peru and Singapore. It's a milestone. It stands as a milestone in bilateral relations, transforming this trade dynamics and leading to a 34% increase in trade volume over the decade. But this FTA not only eliminates tariffs and barriers, but also streamlines procedures, hurdles, making Peruvian exports more competitive in Singapore market, while encouraging Singaporean investments into Peru. I would say that in a broader strategic context, this FTA aligns with Peru's aim to become the epicenter of Asian operations in South America. It provides sturdy platform for Peru to expand its influence in Asian markets. But additionally, both countries are signatories to the CPTPP. CPTPP, a multi-party trade agreement that facilitates trade and regulatory coherence. And this agreement, complements this bilateral FTA that we do have, offering additional mechanism for trade facilitation, regulatory alignment, intellectual property, all these topics you already know. But it also broadens the scope of cooperation between Peru and Singapore, enhancing this economic relationship that we have very strong at this moment. What about trade balance? It's important to note how the trade balance is between Peru and Singapore. Over the past 3 years, the trade balance between Peru and Singapore has shown a $60 million surplus in favor of Singapore. This is not bad. I mean, some people in Peru try to say that if your trade balance is negative, the agreement is a bad agreement. That is not true, This imbalance primarily arises from Peru's significant imports in important goods that we do not produce in Peru. For example, automobile, fuels, gasolines, automobiles by themselves, ammonium nitrate, which are essential, for Peru energy and agricultural sector. So having a negative trade balance is not a bad situation. Actually, as I said, Singapore is a key role player in our foreign trade policy. In the other side, Peru exports to Singapore a wide range of products like shark fins, raw things, leather footwear, fresh produce such blueberries and asparagus. But despite this diversity, there are exports that has not been sufficient to offset this trade imbalance. And again, it's not so bad. It's a good situation to have a very comprehensive agreement with Singapore. So understanding this sector specific dynamics is essential for optimizing future trade between the two nations. So looking forward, strategic consideration might involve Peru diversifying our exports portfolio to Singapore. From this kind of analysis of the 3 years I have said, from the last 3 years, this will allow, to provide valuable insights into sector trends and trade dynamics between Peru and Singapore. And these findings will going to be very crucial for policy formulation and strategic planning aimed at establishing a more balanced and mutually beneficial relation between Peru and Singapore. But at this time, I'm going to focus in from a very, updated research that we did in the Chamber of Commerce 2 weeks ago when I was making my presentation, preparing the slides. And I'm going to focus in some specific products that we have identified from Peru to Singapore and from Singapore to Peru that we can start exporting and importing in a better way, in a broader way, and with more quantities, explaining why do we think this could be possible. Singapore, for example, in the case of, bananas, Cavendish bananas. Singapore imports a substantial 56,000 tons of banana annually. Yet none currently come from Peru. This is a funny situation. A country that Peru exports more than 167,000 tons per year. Specifically, Peru specializes in Cavendish variety, which is popular globally for its taste and a year-round availability. This is very important. And Peru already meets high standard phytosanitary standards and exports, demanding markets like Netherlands, Panama, United States. So we believe that this demonstrates that Peru has this capability to meet Singaporean quality standards. This unexplored market of Peruvian bananas offered, opportunities for trade collaborations for Singaporean importers. And as I said, this is a consistent year-round harvesting cycle on Cavendish bananas in Peru. So this will allow Singaporean importers to have a shot on these products on Singaporean markets that, as I said, EU import more than 56,000 tons annually. Another product where we in the Chamber of Commerce believe we can start increasing our bilateral trade is cocoa beans. Singapore imports an impressive 96,000 tons of cocoa beans annually, but only, please listen carefully, just 100 tons come from Peru. Meanwhile, Peru has a substantial cocoa that has been exporting capacity of more than 60,000 tons per year. We just are exporting 100 tons to Singapore. So Peru cocoa is internationally recognized because of its quality, with the International Cocoa Organization classifying it as a significant producer that exports to Netherlands, Indonesia, Mexico, Malaysia. So we believe we can, get to Singapore as a good competitor and bring in this kind of quality product to Singaporean consumers. The current low volumes of Peru cocoa in Singapore, indicates that there is an untapped market opportunity. As I said, we are well qualified by ICO, the International Cocoa Organization. So Singaporean importers might have some line of making business in the near future from Peru on this product. Cocoa paste. Singapore imports a significant 12,000 tons of cocoa annually, cocoa paste annually, but none of this is currently sourced from Peru. Meanwhile, we export a lot of this cocoa paste, mainly to Argentina, Chile, United States, Costa Rica, and some European countries with high standards that we believe that could be appealing to Singapore consumers. The absence of Peruvian cocoa in Singapore represents, of course, a missed opportunity from our side and from our perspective. So in summary, the market in Singapore demands these kind of products, and Peru is a very good exporter with high capabilities, fertile ground, trade expansion on this cocoa paste. So it can be a very important opportunity that aligns with the broader bilateral trade objectives and further exploration and negotiation making business between two countries. Coffee beans. Singapore has a thriving coffee import market, bringing more than 10,000 tons annually, but just 90 tons from these products has been sourced from Peru. The peak season in Peruvian coffee production runs from April to July, and this seasonally can be strategically leveraged to ensure a steady, high-quality supply to meet Singaporean demands. Peru, we are exporting this kind of products to United States, to Germany, to Belgium, even to Colombia. This is a funny situation. Colombia is a very important exporter of coffee. However, because of our specific quality coffee beans, we are exporting even to Colombia, and we believe that Singapore coffee imports from Peru would be an untapped opportunity where we should give a shot. Given the quality and reputation and value position that Peru is having now in the international market, this could be also new opportunities for increasing trade between Singapore and Peru. And blueberries, Peru is now the larger exporter of blueberries all over the world. Singapore is a noticeable importer of blueberries with annual imports of more than 200 and 700 tons. But of this volume, Peru contributes relatively with a very small portion of just 190 tons. On the global stage, as I say, Peru shines as a dominant player. We think that as we can make it, our exports can get to United States, to Netherlands, China, where it has increasing a lot, UK, and despite this impressive global, stature and structure we are having for these kind of exports, the market presence in Singapore remains very modest, So we suggest there is a lot of room to grow there. And given Peru proven track record in, catering to premium markets, we insist that we should try to increase our Singaporean imports of Peruvian blueberries for the next months and years. just to another products where we believe there are a lot of things to do and a lot of business to do. Singapore imports fresh grapes. Annually, the imports are considerably very high. 17,000 tons of grapes, but only 188 tons being sourced from Peru. And Peru holds a strong position in the global grape export arena. We ship more than 535,000 tons of fresh grapes to the world. And that peak production of Peruvian grapes are between November and March, this aligning with the seasonal consideration of potential exports to the Singaporean market. So despite this remarkable export performance, Peru has barely scratched the surface in Singapore grape market. Again, these are opportunities that I have bring this evening or this morning, where I believe Singaporean importers and companies can give a shot to. And finally, cotton cloths. Peruvian cotton is recognized globally for outstanding qualities such as fine texture, softness, durability, positioning as a primer product in the textile world. We export annually more than 1 billion, with key products like t-shirts and shirts and pants, baby clothes. And there is a significant market potential in Singapore, especially on pants segments, where there's a noticeable discrepancy between market size and Peruvian current exports. So I believe that the superior quality and affordability of Peruvian cotton, combined with a strong global reputation, can be an opportunity for expanding trade relation in Singapore. And of course, having Singapore also as a distributor in the Asian region of this kind of Peruvian products. Let's move quickly to the opportunities in Peru. An overview of the strategic possibilities between Singapore and Peru. In this case, in smartphones trade, we believe that Singapore ranks among the top of 15 countries globally in smartphones exports. That we have 32 million people in Peru, and we do have more than 32 million cell phones in Peru. I believe that Peru is one of the few countries in Latin America where we do have at least one cell phone per person. So we were looking at the data of the value exports of Singapore. It's more than 2.6 billion. And in the other hand, Peru imports more than 6 million smartphones units annually, with a significant increase of 78% that comes from China and 21% that comes from Vietnam. But we believe that Singapore can start increasing the share, the market share for this kind of products, where we are very, very good, and Peru buys a lot, and the imports are increasing a lot in the few last years. In the case of earphones, the potential for strategic collaboration between Singapore and Peru in this earphone trade sector. Singapore is a leading player, ranking between the 10 top countries globally, and with an annual export of more than 425 million. And in the other side, Peru imports more than 10 million earphones units annually. This trade landscape presents a compelling case for Peru to diversify its imports, and of course, considering Singapore's prominence in this sector, we suggest that this product, that meets standards and high quality and innovation, could be beneficial for Peruvian consumers in the market we have now. So this product specifically, and I have seen, the data on Peruvian customs, can be a very important business that can help us to increase bilateral trade between Peru and Singapore. Considering what the COVID-19 situation we did have in 19 and 20 years, we in Peru moved to a very digital, environment, and laptops were a very necessary hardware for companies, for education purposes, for making business, for digital trade. And Singapore is a significant player in the global laptop market. You rank also among the top 10 top exporting countries with an annual export value of more than 2.4 billion. And in contrast, Peru imports approximately like 1.8 million laptops units annually. They come mainly from China and in some cases from Korea. Some of them are, assembled in other regions, but the existing trade landscape suggests a clear opportunity for Peru and Singapore to diversify the laptop imports, considering that Singapore, you are an additional supplier for these products, And given the reputation that Singapore has for high quality, technological advanced products, incorporating laptops in the bilateral trade can be a significant benefit for the Peruvian market and for Singaporean companies that would like to export to Peru. Additionally, laptops in the trade portfolio also could serve as a strengthening an overall economic and trade relation between Peru and Singapore. This can help to reap off the benefits of the current bilateral trade agreement that we do have. But of course, we are expecting also that the environment that we will have in the Pacific Alliance, where Peru and Singapore will have another way to be related, could be also a good environment to increase this kind of export. So finally, I want to share, this recent landmark development in Peru international trade landscape, that is the ratification of Pacific Alliance Singapore Free Trade Agreement, the PA-Singapore FTA. It was done in February 2023. This is a historic moment for the bilateral relation because Singapore becomes the first associated state in the Pacific Alliance. This makes a seminal point in Peru's evolving trade relation, and the Pacific Alliance Singapore FTA serves as a cornerstone in the Pacific Alliance coverage and larger strategy to position the Pacific Alliance as a global platform for economic and trade integration. So Singapore allows us to show this important trade relations that we will like to have with the Asia Pacific countries, starting with Singapore, And one of the key objectives of these groundbreaking agreements is to improve the market access condition between the members countries. And additionally, this treaty tries to create a robust legal framework that will facilitate the smooth exchange of goods, services, and investment between the four countries of the Pacific Alliance and Singapore. And it's also important to note that the new FTA synergies, that are well existed because of the agreements that we do have previously, it complements perfectly the bilateral trade agreements that we do have, also the CPTPP and this Pacific Alliance Singapore agreement to make a trilateral good balanced relations and very updated, of course, to the necessities and requirements of the current companies that we do have in the four Pacific Alliance countries and Singapore. So in summary, the ratification of the Pacific Alliance Singapore FTAs is far more than just another trade agreement. It's a strategic maneuver aimed for boosting the Peruvian relations with Asian countries and to support this trade ecosystem that integrates very well with the existing frameworks that we do have in this state policy that we have in Peru. Just to finish, I would like to flag the fact that Peru, since 2006 approximately, started to work very hard to be a country very well integrated in the world, not only with North America and Europe, but also with Asian countries. And I would like to say that Singapore FTA between Peru and Singapore has been a driver to allow us to show our community, trade community, that free trade agreements worked. But in the other hand, free trade agreements should be complemented as much as we can. So CPTPP and Pacific Alliance FTA are aimed for that purpose, and that has allowed us to have mainly more than 95% of the private sector of Peru supporting FTA policies and supporting increasing trade between our strategic trade partners. And I would like to flag the fact that Singapore is one of those very important free trade partners that we do have in Peru, and that would have have allowed us to make a record export numbering in 2022. We got to 63,000 million exports, a number we never got, and we expect to increase this a little bit more this year, of course, using these important opportunities that we do have of our more than 20 FTAs and Singapore FTA, CPTPP, and Pacific Alliance Singapore Agreement will help in this sense. So with this, I finish my presentation. Thank you very much. I would like to have some questions at the end. I will be more than happy to answer on this. And again, thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the organizations that make this presentation happen. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Posada. It was a wonderful presentation. We will now welcome the next two speakers for the next presentation. We'll be sharing on Peru-Singapore FTA and CPTPP. The next two speakers will be Ms. Liz Chilla and Ms. Christian. Let me give a brief overview, brief biography of these two speakers. Elizabeth Chilla is currently the Principal Trade Specialist at the Ministry of Trade and Industry, MTI of Singapore. Elizabeth has also covered a range of portfolios over her 27 years in the Singapore Civil Service that commenced in April 1995. From March 2020, Liz has also taken on a trade consultancy role at Singapore Business Federation, guiding SBF on FTA outreach and training for businesses based in Singapore, as well as working with SBF colleagues on trade issues at forums such as ABAC. For Ms. Grace Chen, she is an Assistant Director at the Ministry of Trade and Industry, MTI, Americas Division. I'll now share the screen for the speakers. Yeah.
Thanks, Hock Chai. Good morning to our fellow Singaporeans and good evening to our friends in Peru. I'm Grace from the Ministry of Trade and Industry, Singapore. My colleague Liz and I will be speaking on our bilateral FTA, the Peru-Singapore or PESFTA, and the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, also known as the CPTPP, today. Allow me to start with a general overview of our trade relations. Singapore's trade flows with Peru have grown in the recent years. Sorry, could we move to the next slide? So Singapore's trade flows with Peru have grown in the recent years, and there are opportunities for further development. In 2022, Peru was Singapore's 11th largest trading partner in Latin America and the Caribbean. Bilateral trade in goods amounted to 176.6 million in 2022, a 47% year-on-year increase. Singapore's imports from Peru amounted to 61.2 million, a 79% increase from the previous year. Top imports comprise fish, fresh fruits, and petroleum oils. Singapore's exports to Peru amounted to 115.3 million, a 17% year-on-year increase. Top exports comprise items such as edible food preparations and electrical apparatus. Our total trade in services with Peru amounted to 707.6 million in 2021, which is a 188% year-on-year increase. Singapore's export of services amounted to 420.8 million, a 223% increase from the previous year, mainly in insurance and telecommunication services. Singapore's import of services amounted to 286.8 million, a 13% year-on-year increase, mainly in transport and trade-related services. And in terms of investment, Singapore's stock of direct investment abroad, DIA, into Peru was about 2 billion in 2021, mainly in financial and insurance services. So the general upward trend demonstrates the growing commercial interests between Singapore and Peru's businesses. Today, there are a number of Singapore-based enterprises which have physical or distribution presence in Peru, particularly in the infrastructure, innovation and technology and agri-trade sectors. These include big names such as PSA Marine, Grupo KB, Olam International, and Crimson Logic. I'm sure you guys will be quite familiar with these companies. And we are seeing more companies, including SMEs, express their interest to find out more about the business opportunities in Latin America and want to know how our FTAs can benefit them. And we hope that this sharing will be helpful in that aspect. So on to the opportunities Singapore presents. Next slide, please. Thank you. Onto the opportunities Singapore presents. Peruvian companies can tap onto Singapore's strategic location as a gateway to Southeast Asia to break into new export markets. First, Singapore is a trusted financial hub and gateway to the growing Southeast Asian market with a population of more than 660 million and a combined GDP of US 2.7 trillion. This is a potential market for Peruvian food products, textiles and technology, as Mr. Posada had mentioned earlier, as well as in digital and transport services. Peruvian companies could use Singapore as a base to export consumer goods to the Southeast Asian markets. Secondly, Peruvian companies can tap onto Singapore's extensive and growing network of 27 FTAs. These FTAs bring tariff savings, ease of services and investment regulations, mutually recognized standards, and customs facilitation, amongst other benefits. Peruvian companies can also tap on Singapore as a global logistics hub. So not only is Singapore a 7-hour flight radius from more than half the world's population, but Singapore is also the world's busiest container transshipment port, handling more than 30 million TEUs, which are 20-foot equivalent unit containers, annually, with connections to more than 600 ports globally, making us an ideal partner for Peruvian businesses' transshipment needs. Next slide, please. Thank you. For Singapore businesses, Peru presents trade and investment opportunities in these 3 key sectors: agriculture, infrastructure, and innovation and tech. I believe this is aligned with what Mr. Posada had spoken on earlier. Peru has experienced a boom in its agricultural exports over the past 2 decades, and the sector remains one of Peru's best growth prospects. Top agricultural exports include blueberries, asparagus, avocados, quinoa, bananas, organic coffee, and cocoa, as Mr. Posada had also mentioned earlier. Given the volume of Peru's total exports and the popularity of its produce, there are opportunities for Singapore companies to engage in agribusiness, sourcing, and trading in Peru. And in terms of infrastructure, Peru launched the Plan Nacional de Infraestructura para la Competitividad in 2019, which comprises the development of infrastructure projects to increase Peru's productivity and competitiveness. Under this plan, Peru has embarked on government projects such as the development of its Chinchero Airport in 2020 with South Korea and the construction of its Nueva Carretera Central with France in 2021. There is potential for Singapore companies to participate in infrastructure projects such as master planning for township and industrial development, providing solutions for clean water and waste management, and developing Peru's urban transport system, such as metro, airports, seaports, all given Singapore's companies' experience in these areas. Lastly, on innovation and technology, the Peruvian government implemented the Digital Government Law in 2018, which provides the institutional infrastructure to support digitization of the public sector, as well as the National Digital Transformation System in 2020, which aims to promote digitization in both public and private sectors. The government is also keen to promote innovation in the country, evident from its setting up of accelerators like Startup Peru and Innovate Peru. These initiatives provide funding to SMEs and offer access to innovation labs in the country, creating a favorable environment for these startups to develop. There is massive potential for Singapore companies to take part in some of these initiatives and provide technology solutions such as agri-tech, intelligent transport systems, ICT, and e-government. Next slide, please. With all these opportunities, I'm sure you're curious on how the PESFTA can facilitate your business interests. So the PESFTA entered into force in 2009 and is the second bilateral FTA between Singapore and a Latin American country, the first being our FTA with Panama. Allow me to provide a brief overview of the benefits from some chapters of the PESFTA. In terms of goods, we have tariff elimination for all originating exports since 2019, all at preferential 0%, no exclusions. The goods chapter also establishes a common set of rules of origin, making it easier for goods to be qualified for preferential treatment. We also enjoy increased transparency and efficiency in customs procedures. And next, we have the cross-border trade in services chapter, which provides enhanced market access in areas such as the telecommunications, transport, energy, health, manufacturing, and business services sectors that our other trading partners may not be able to enjoy. It also aims to build a more predictable environment for service suppliers through a range of provisions such as national treatment, which ensures that Singapore service suppliers will be treated equally as Peruvian service suppliers across both our markets in areas where commitments are undertaken. On investments, the investment chapter seeks to lower the barriers of entry for Singapore investors in Peru by ensuring fair and equitable treatment, access to due processes, and due diligence. It also covers clauses that seek to promote greater flows of FDI between our countries, and it provides protection for investments to ultimately ensure a more fair, transparent, and secure environment. I will also briefly touch on the e-commerce and government procurement chapters later on. Next slide, please. So let's take a look at trading goods. Since the entry into force of the PESFTA in 2009, Singapore's total trade in goods with Peru has grown by 203%. We had a 10-year staged tariff elimination period. This means we had progressively eliminated customs duties over the course of 10 years from entry into force. So in 2009, we had tariff elimination for more than 80% of originating products. And since 2019, 10 years after, we have enjoyed tariff elimination for all originating exports at preferential 0%, no exclusions. Next slide, please. Thank you. Under the trading goods chapter, also, both countries also agreed on a liberal set of product-specific rules. This grants Singaporean or Peruvian exporters greater flexibility by making it easier for their goods to be deemed as originating from Singapore or Peru and qualifying for preferential treatment. We also enjoy increased transparency and efficiency in customs procedures. For example, both parties have agreed to adopt a risk management approach to customs activities in order to facilitate the swift clearance, especially on low-risk consignments. We have also agreed to exchange information on risk management techniques in the performance of our custom procedures. Next slide, please. Moving on, the PESFTA's services chapter provides enhanced market access across committed sectors by removing barriers to trade in the provision of services. Notably, on national treatment, both Singapore and Peru are obliged to provide foreign service suppliers with the same treatment as local service suppliers where commitments are undertaken. So this creates a more favorable business environment for our service suppliers. On local presence, Singapore and Peru service suppliers are not required to be a resident, nor establish or maintain a representative office when providing their services in each other's markets. And with regard to domestic regulation, Singapore and Peru are committed towards ensuring that measures affecting trade in services are to be administered in an objective and impartial manner. Some of the committed sectors under the services chapter include telecommunications, transport, energy, health, manufacturing, and business services. An exhaustive list of sectors can be found on Enterprise SG's website. Next slide, please. The PESFTA investment chapter seeks to encourage greater flows of FDI through investment promotion and investment protection provisions. As mentioned earlier, the purpose of these provisions is to provide a more fair, transparent, and secure investment environment for both Singapore and Peruvian businesses. This is done through granting fair and equitable treatment to investors and undertaking commitments that prevent parties from engaging in discrimination, unlawful expropriation, and imposing restrictions on transfers. Of note, the national treatment provision ensures that Singaporean or Peruvian investors and their investments will be given the same level of treatment as locals in the Peru or Singapore market under committed sectors after the investment is established in the host state. This way, we create an environment of competitive equality between Peruvian and local investors. Another point to note is the most favored nation treatment, or MFN clause, which introduces comparative treatment where Singaporean or Peruvian investors and their investments will be accorded the same treatment as any other foreign investor in the Peruvian-Singapore market under comparable circumstances. The MFN clause provides our investors with the assurance that they will not be disadvantaged compared to other foreign investors. Next slide, please. Just some other benefits to highlight. Both Singapore and Peru have committed to opening our government procurement markets to maximize competitive opportunities for our suppliers. This offers our businesses greater certainty when bidding for government procurement contracts. Furthermore, our e-commerce chapter covers the waiver of customs duties on electronic transmissions, and we have agreed to non-discriminatory treatment of digital products. We are also committed to protect consumers from fraudulent and deceptive commercial practices. This ensures the free flow of information and data, which drive our digital economies, of course, while protecting consumers as well. We also have a dispute settlement chapter to ensure an effective, efficient, and transparent process for consultations and resolution of disputes arising from the PESFTA. And with that, thank you for your time. I hope my sharing has been helpful. I will now leave you in Liz's good hands to talk about the CPTPP.
Thank you very much, Grace, and good morning to everybody in Singapore and good evening to those in Peru. I'm very glad for the overview that Grace has provided, and even better pleased to see how Mr. Carlos Pedrosa has said how businesses and engagement between Singapore and Peru have bloomed ever since we did the FTA, as both Carlos and myself were involved in the Peru-Singapore FTA with myself as the chief negotiator for that FTA. So it's very good to see it going forward. So with all that good news, why then did we also then add on the CPTPP? So let me just give you a brief background and then explain how it enhances all the benefits that we already have in our bilateral FTA. Next slide, please. So the CPTPP, as it started, was the TPP because we had the United States with us, as you can see in the slide, targeted to be a very high standard and comprehensive FTA in the Asia-Pacific region. It was part of what APEC had tried to achieve, known as the Free Trade Area of the Asia-Pacific, which is why all the members of TPP are also APEC economies. So we started and we launched the negotiations in 2010, and we concluded it in 2015. Next slide, please. So the TPP provided a huge benefit for all the countries involved in it. It focused at that point in time in 30% of Singapore's total goods trade was already centered in the TPP countries. Next slide. And 30% of foreign direct investment and 20% of Singapore's investments were flowing. So it was a very, very good way, as Carlos has pointed out, to enhance our distribution network. As Grace has pointed out, we have a high P network cargo with the efficiency of PSA, and it's enhanced by the efficiency of PSA running the port in Peru as well. So even bilaterally enhanced by the TPP, there's a lot of trade facilitation that is taking place building on this. Next slide, please. Then TPP sort of like came to a halt thanks to this individual, Mr. Donald Trump, who decided to pull the United States out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But at that point in time, be it Mr. Trump or Hillary Clinton, for some strange reason, the United States, who had designed the TPP provisions, decided that TPP was not going to work for themselves. Next slide, please. So, but it's a very high level FTA, as I pointed out before, and I explained going forward. And so we didn't want to lose it. So after Mr. Trump pulled the United States out, Japan, Australia, and Singapore decided that we need to have a rescue plan. Next slide, please. The rescue plan was the comprehensive and progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, which basically is the TPP cut and paste into this new agreement, but with certain provisions which were suspended. These were the carrots, designed to get the United States back into the TPP agreement. And so with the United States, during the negotiations, having shown strong interest in higher protection for intellectual property, a lot of the suspended chapters were there because, IP is a regime change. So once you change your regime, everyone will benefit from your IP standards and not just FTA partners. So we kept that as a carrot. Looks like nobody is biting the carrot as yet. And so it entered into force for everybody, with Peru being one of the last few to ratify in September 2021, Malaysia, November 2022, Chile 23, and Brunei just recently last year. So now all members are using the CPTPP. And, as I said earlier, it was designed to be the free trade area of the Asia-Pacific vehicle for the APEC economies, but we now have a non-APEC member, which broadens the entire scope and potential of the CPTPP, with United Kingdom assessing the CPTPP, and we are just waiting for the UK to finish their domestic ratification process, and so that they can become a full member of CPTPP, which further broadens the scope and opportunities for this FTA. Next slide, please. So what is it? It's 11 parties, not counting United Kingdom, and it complements, because with all the members here, except for Mexico and Canada, Singapore already has a pre-existing bilateral relationship. For New Zealand and Australia, and of course our ASEAN counterparts, we have multiple pathways. So why add another way? So for Singaporeans very used to our highway network, why is it that we're always looking into faster ways to bring you to your destination? The same simile can be applied to why we do more and bigger FTAs with the same partners, so that businesses have better choice and opportunities to get to their destination in the way that works best for them. Next slide, please. So this is the scope of the chapters in CPTPP. Grace did a very good overview of what we have in Peru-Singapore FTA. Peru-Singapore FTA will cover mainly all the provisions which are in black and blue. So the rest, enhancement for e-commerce, telecommunications, is in the CPTPP. Slightly newer approach to competition, brand new chapter on SOE, very enhanced intellectual property and labor and environment provisions. Again, I would say it's ironically because these are the three chapters which are pushed really, really strongly by the United States. And of course, state-owned enterprises, it is a US design to make sure that you can look at anti-competitive behavior even from the subsidies aspect and not just the traditional competition policy behavior. All the green highlights are the new chapters which are supposed to help SMEs integrate into the trading system, and so they are more cooperation. It helps you domestically. So in Peru and in Singapore, our enterprise is for Singapore Enterprise Singapore and Singapore Business Federation, together with our colleagues in the ministry and other related agencies, will look to see how to enhance these green chapters so that more and more inclusivity of small businesses can be participating into this FTA. Next slide, please. So Grace already talked about the rules of origin. So why is it now that we are looking into a broader? It's because you can source from more. So I was listening very attentively to what Carlos was telling us about, how we can all use export Peruvian agricultural products to Singapore, but it's not just for us to eat it in its raw state or to distribute it to other members within CPTPP. You can also use it as ingredients for Singapore's processed agriculture, for which we are very famous for. Singapore cuisine, we also have Singapore chocolate. We have a lot of things in which all these products from Peru can be used as part of a product and then sent back to Peru or the rest of CPTPP. So it further broadens the use of Peruvian agricultural inputs into processed agricultural products and production that takes place in Singapore. So this is just an example about ice cream, because ice cream is something we all know, and you can see that for this you are using sugar from Australia, eggs from Malaysia, milk from New Zealand. I put here chocolate from Mexico, but after listening to Carlos, we can always say we are also using the cocoa and chocolate from Peru as well. And then the chocolate ice cream is made in Singapore, and then it can be further distributed. Well, ice cream is a bit perishable, so maybe closer to our region, or you can have chocolate biscuits, and the range just opens up tremendously for us to source more high quality agricultural produce from Peru. Next slide, please. We also talked about promoting efficient and transport customs procedure already in the bilateral FTA. So what does the CPTPP add to it? It adds greater certainty. Timelines have been improved. There's also a broader coverage of issues that can be covered. And so therefore, even clearing the goods between Singapore and Peru is heightened. And it helps as well that PSA is running both ports. And just as an aside, the Peruvian airport was also designed by and CAAS helped develop it. And so we have a lot of synergies there, even for air cargo as well as sea. It's too far for us to use a road transport, but again, it's the distribution network. So once you arrive in Peru or once you arrive in Singapore, the distribution network within Peru for the other CPTPP members in Latin America, such as Chile, will also be facilitated. So CPTPP allows you to broaden your view beyond just the bilateral engagement, but what happens to the goods when it arrives at your destination and needs to be further distributed and moved within the CPTPP region. Next slide, please. So again, beyond traditional manufacturing, we were one of the first FTAs to look at what is now seen as green issues in remanufacturing. Remanufacturing means that you repair your product, you issue a like new warranty, and so you don't throw it away. This has great benefits, especially Carlos was talking about the smartphones and all this, which you always have to change the widgets. So instead of just throwing away the phone and adding a lot to your litter, you can now remanufacture it and then reuse it because it comes with a like new warranty. Consumers are assured of good quality, and it helps the whole green circular economy products. And because of this, I have noticed that more and more industrial goods are looking to see how they can tap on this manufacturing sector to help them achieve a greater sustainable vision. Maintenance, repair, and overhaul is for servicing activities, so for aircraft, for your vessels, And so when you come and get your aircraft repaired in Singapore, when it goes back to Peru, you do not need to pay duties on the repaired new product that has been put into your aircraft or your vessel. It also allows a greater and broader coverage for temporary admission of goods. So I'm focusing here basically on MICE activities, which is the exhibitions. So when you bring your goods for an exhibition in Peru, I will talk about Peru more because you have more customs duties than Singapore. So when you bring your goods there for the activity, let's say you're just bringing our used cars, because it's very easy to envisage. You bring 10 cars from Singapore into Peru for the auto exhibition. At that point of entry is called temporary entry because you're bringing it just for the purposes of the exhibition. And so you do not need to pay customs duties upon entry of these goods. But if for some reason when the exhibition is over and you don't take back the 10 cars, you only take back 9 cars because you managed to sell one or something like that, then you pay customs duties for that one car that you have left behind. So this will apply for agriculture exhibitions, any sort of exhibitions that are happening in Peru. For Singapore, the real benefit is when you're bringing in alcohol, beer and stuff, because those are the only products for which we have customs duties. Beyond MICE activities, the temporary entry also allows you to do filming, sports activities, and also for your containers when they are moving in and out, when they are empty and waiting to be uploaded, they are deemed to be temporary at the port, waiting to be loaded, and therefore you do not need to pay any duties during that point in time either on the empty container. But some countries impose a duty on that because they do not want to see empty containers, as you saw probably for a lot of pictures during COVID, just piling up in their port and blocking actual port activity. So this all then links you back to logistics, how you're using it and how it enhances the to-fro between the countries. And for CPTPP is how it then enhances, as I said just now, the logistics for your neighboring countries, all under the same network, so to speak. So you don't need to think about changing or what other new regulation, because it's the same regulation that will apply to everybody. Greater transparency, you know, SPS, there's a lot of gray at times as to what you mean by good quality food, safe for human consumption. And so the TPP chapter allows you to ask questions and check with the regulatory authority as to why is it taking so long for the approval, so that the approval process is not seen as blocking the trade, but facilitating and enhancing the trade between the countries in TPP. And that is also good news for Peru and Singapore, because this is an enhancement over what we had in our bilateral FTA. Next slide, please. So TPP services market, when we did the Peru-Singapore, it was also on a negative list. But so now for TPP, for services between Singapore and Peru, there may not be that much of an enhancement because we started very positively. But I would ask those in the audience on both sides who are interested in restaurants, in food. Conchita is doing very well in Singapore. We all love Peruvian cuisine. There'll be another way in which to get services, restaurants into Singapore, and hopefully Singapore restaurants also into Peru, because both of us, we all love to eat. And so that's something beyond the traditional when you talk about telecommunication services, financial services. Peru is such a tourism hub. I was very fortunate myself in one of the 14 times I was to Peru to actually make it to Machu Picchu. And so there are a lot of other opportunities there. And then now that we are moving into the digital realm, even more digital services that you can provide, building on what has already been committed to in the services schedule. Next slide, please. Again, investment opportunities are there. It's the same a bit of like what we have in the bilateral, but enhanced because a few other sectors. And because as well, if we are now thinking about how you can put your investment in Peru or put your investment in Singapore, and as Grace said, once your investment is in Singapore and you're deemed to be a Singapore company, how then this facilitates you to operate and take advantage of the network of FTAs that Singapore has here, for which you can do your business, and vice versa, if you're putting your business into Peru for your telecoms business or your financial services, how then you can then use that as the destination to deal with the rest of Latin America that Peru has special relationships with, be it via FTAs or via their Pacific Alliance. Next slide, please. Government procurement, broader categories have been added under TPP. And for Peru to note, because we have 3 members in TPP for the first time who also provided a government procurement, that's Malaysia and Vietnam. For Mexico, primarily their market access in the past had always been under NAFTA and even under the original Pacific Alliance. So this again broadens up the whole opportunities for you to provide government procurement services in Peru and for Peruvian companies to provide it in Singapore or even within the rest of the TPP region. The next slide, please. So digital economy, I mean, that's the buzzword of the day. Everybody is looking at a gadget. That's how we can have this webinar. So rules, clearer rules. The TPP e-commerce chapter is the most comprehensive coverage of e-commerce guiding rules. In fact, the ongoing WTO JSI negotiations is trying to build and include a lot of this provision. So until that happens, you are already having a first mover advantage using the e-commerce chapter in TPP to regulate, guide, and navigate your businesses between Singapore and Peru and with the rest of the TPP countries. Next slide, please. So IP, as I said, it was a USR. So when you know when it is a USR, there'll be very, very high standards. There's a broader coverage of issues. You can now cover sound marks, scent marks, you know, so this also helps when you're doing your marketing of products. We have geographical indications in TPP, not as broad as what we have in EU-Singapore FTA, but we have some provision for PISCO, building on what we already had in Singapore-Peru FTA on PISCO. And so now that Singapore, after the EU-Singapore FTA has set up our own GI register, this is something that will foster greater protection for Peruvian products, that for the products that qualify under the new Singapore GI registry as well. So you can do your innovation, you can be assured that there's going to be no IP theft and no sort of demands that no, if you can only invest here if you give me your IP rights, as some allege is happening in other countries. So it's a very clean and neutral, and it's very good to foster innovation within the region. And just looking at the type of innovation that's already happening in Peru, how both sides can benefit from this as well. Next slide, please. So again, TPP was one of the first FTAs to have deeper protection for basic workers' rights. Those of us who are involved in the ongoing IPEF negotiations with a lot of focus on labor. So you can just, don't need to wait for that. You can see how TPP is already helping you. For Singapore business moving out into the TPP region, including Peru, just make sure you are aware what the labor rules are, because sometimes within Singapore, some businesses are so used to NTUC looking after you that you forget to do your homework and to see what you need to do when you're taking your operations overseas. So use this chapter as a guide to protect you as you look after your workers in the establishments and operations you're doing overseas. Again, CPTPP is one of the first few FTAs to have a lot of focus on sustainable trade, mainly via saying what sort of international conventions all CPTPP members should be part of, and setting the foundation for the ongoing WTO negotiations on fish subsidies. There's a very in-depth coverage there already in CPTPP. So Peru, you're very good into the fishing trade, and Singapore, we have a few fishing vessels. Look into it, how to see we can have better synergy so that we can better enjoy each other's either raw produce, the fish which is already coming in, or the processed fish based on how you're doing the fishing for these products. As I said, level playing field for SOEs, because this is the first FTA where we are looking at SOE as from an anti-competitive behavior by looking at the level playing field in the terms of subsidies given to these companies. Next slide, please. Inclusive trade, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of it was to help to make sure that we have SMEs who are also better able to take part of this very huge and comprehensive FTA. Not just the MNCs who have their own in-house legal guidance, but a lot of the SMEs, the MSMEs, we have specific chapters, and therefore, even on the Singapore ESG FTA website, you have additional information under the SME section to help and guide SMEs use this FTA. Next slide, please. So that's it for a brief overview, and I enhance this brief because, of the time given to us, we cannot go in depth, but it just shows that the relationship, we are far apart. I've been to Peru at least 14 times, and it takes you a long time to get there. But despite the distances, we have a good relationship. We started off because, as Carlos mentioned, Peru had the vision to integrate, and that resulted in our first bilateral FTA with them. And our relationship with Peru is just growing broader and broader. And I'll hand you over now to my next speaker, who will talk to you about the next wave of enhancements that we are doing with Peru. On to you, Val.
Yeah, thank you, Liz and Grace, for the presentations. We will now invite Ms. Valerie Yun, Director at the Americas Division of the Ministry of Trade and Industry MTI, will be sharing on the recent developments in the Pacific Alliance, Singapore FTA, and Joint Work Plan. Valerie, please.
Thank you very much, Hock Chye. I just want to also thank, first of all, Singapore Business Federation for putting this session together. My thanks also to the earlier speakers, Carlos, Elizabeth, Grace, very comprehensive presentations. I think we are actually running a little bit ahead of time. So I'm not going to, go into too much of the technical aspects of the Pacific Alliance Singapore Free Trade Agreement. But let me start by giving you a broad overview of the Pacific Alliance. And this was something that both Carlos as well as Elizabeth have mentioned. Could I get my slides on the screen? So whilst we wait for the slide deck to get on screen, just to share that for the Ministry of Trade and Industry in Singapore, we've been very closely watching developments in the Pacific Alliance. It is a very progressive, interesting economic bloc in Latin America. And when it was first founded in 2011, among the founding members, and of course, Peru be one of them, the other three member states being Mexico, Chile, as well as Peru and Colombia, we were really interested to have a look at what the bloc was working on, to see if there were also opportunities then that Singapore could explore with this bloc, all in the interest of business facilitation and creating new opportunities for our companies to collaborate. So thanks very much, Hock Chye. Could you move to the next slide? So I mentioned that this is a progressive economic bloc, the Pacific Alliance, the four founding member states, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and Peru. It's now in its 12th year. So congratulations to the Pacific Alliance. I think they've made a lot of progress over these past 12 years, a lot of achievements. I think overall objective of the Pacific Alliance really is to foster greater integration, first of all, amongst the four member states, to facilitate the free movement of goods, services, resources, and people. And that requires economic integration, commercial integration, harmonization of processes, standards. And what is really interesting for Singapore is that this economic bloc called the Pacific Alliance is really oriented towards the Asia Pacific. There has been a lot of international interest in the Pacific Alliance. As you can see, there are currently 63 observer states from across the globe. Singapore was one of these observer states starting from 2014. And the bloc itself is also growing. with other members in the Latin American region now also putting their hand up to become full-fledged parts of the Pacific Alliance. You can see Costa Rica and Ecuador are separately in their own processes of acceding to this bloc. Next slide, please. So what does the Pacific Alliance represent to Singapore and to the world? If you look at the Pacific Alliance as a collective market and not so much the individual 4 markets that are currently part of it, it represents a really significant collective, region and a lot of opportunities then that it presents to businesses. Put together, the Pacific Alliance represents the 8th largest economy in the world, with a nominal GDP of $2 trillion US. And if you look at that, it really represents about 35% of the Latin American region's total GDP. So really quite significant. Population-wise, I think Jason mentioned this in his opening remarks, 230 million people, very large consumer market, and the middle class is rapidly growing. So that presents its own set of opportunities there. Average per capita GDP for the Pacific Alliance currently is about $18,000 US. And if you're talking about import and export opportunities, I think that's really quite a significant factor to consider. Collectively, also, the Pacific Alliance economy is growing steadily. Annual GDP growth is expected to be at about 3.3% over the next 5 years. And that puts it ahead of the average regional GDP growth, which is currently at about 2.5%. So this Pacific Alliance grouping have taken a coordinated and rather innovative approach to trade and investment promotion. We're talking about joint commercial offices, we're talking about participating in business fairs and trade fairs as a bloc rather than as individual markets. The Pacific Alliance also very interestingly has an integrated stock exchange, which combined now is the largest stock exchange in Latin America in terms of market capitalization, in terms of number of listed companies. They also have other initiatives to just kind of bring the 4 markets together. For example, joint research networks, doing collaborative R&D, harmonizing their standards across, whether that's for phytosanitary standards and so on, but also looking at physical infrastructure, how to ensure that the movement of physical goods across borders within the Pacific Alliance is as seamless as possible. So I mentioned that the Pacific Alliance represents a really significant part of the entire Latin American region's GDP. In terms of foreign trade, it's a very externally oriented bloc, representing half of the region's total foreign trade. And in terms of attracting foreign direct investment into the Pacific Alliance markets, it also currently represents 45% of the entire region. So very attractive then to foreign investors. So for Singapore, as I mentioned earlier, we've been taking a real interest in this bloc. As I said, they are like-minded partners to us, pro-business, pro-trade, and again, externally oriented towards the Asia Pacific. So we became an observer state to the Pacific Alliance in 2014, where we started to really engage at the Pacific Alliance level with the member states. We started attending the annual summits amongst our leaders. And in 2017, we then took another significant step towards engaging this bloc more meaningfully. And that was to start a process of acceding to this other tier, I would say, of membership called the associate states. As you could tell earlier, there are many observer states currently to the Pacific Alliance. And what the Pacific Alliance members then did was create this new tier of membership called associate state, which really then would be your closest, I would say, partnership that you can forge between the Pacific Alliance and external countries. What becoming an associate state really required us to do as Singapore was to have free trade agreements with the bloc. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick timeline of then what took place between the launch of our FTA negotiations with the Pacific Alliance and current. You might be asking yourselves, we already have the bilateral Peru-Singapore FTA, we have the CPTPP, And Grace and Elizabeth have given you, I think, a lot of information on both pathways. So you might be asking yourself then, what is the incremental value of a Pacific Alliance Singapore FTA? The answer to this really is, if you look at the composition of the Pacific Alliance, 3 of the 4 Pacific Alliance members are actually in the CPTPP, and that's Peru, Chile, and Mexico. So the only exception here is Colombia, and obviously Singapore is part of the CPTPP as well. So what really are the additional elements that you can look forward to when the Pacific Alliance Singapore FTA is in force? Because the 4 out of 5 signatories to this FTA are CPTPP members, there was a very clear agreement and decision taken that the CPTPP would be the standard, the basis for the negotiations. You know, the CPTPP is a very high quality, high standard, comprehensive agreement. So it really formed then that basis for these additional talks. Next slide, please. So just going a little bit into the Pacific Alliance Singapore FTA, it is a comprehensive agreement. Again, it mirrors very closely what the CPTPP offers. And it therefore has, you know, your chapters in terms of trade in goods, trade in services, investment, government procurement, customs and trade facilitation, e-commerce, and so on. There are, excuse me, some elements in the Pacific Alliance Singapore FTA that do go a little bit beyond the CPTPP. So I just want to flag a couple of them here. So in the Pacific Alliance Singapore FTA, there is a new element that you would not find in the CPTPP, and that is a chapter on international maritime transport services. And the purpose really of this chapter is to facilitate maritime cooperation between the parties. And in so doing, you know, to eliminate barriers to participation in our respective maritime transport sectors. There are also some additional improvements to the commitments that we have taken under the Customs and Trade Facilitation chapter in areas such as, you know, issuance and validity of advanced rulings, single window, automation, release of goods, including perishable goods, and faster clearance of express consignments. Next slide, please. So, you know, again, I will not go into each of the individual chapters. The legal text for the Pacific Alliance Singapore Free Trade Agreement is publicly available, and it will be published on Singapore's part on Enterprise Singapore's website shortly. But I just wanted to make a point here about what the Pacific Alliance Singapore FTA really signifies for us. And from our perspective, it really is a commitment by the PA, the Pacific Alliance, and Singapore to free trade, to connectivity, and to greater economic integration. And we really do want this to be that additional pathway for our companies, our respective companies, to take advantage of over and above our existing pathways, which are the bilateral FTA as well as the CPTPP. I think also what the FTA means to us is that it formalizes our position as an associate state of the PA. Again, I mentioned that this was really that higher tier of partnership that an external partner can have with the bloc. And what this gives us really is a privileged position to engage with this economic grouping, where we are invited to the annual summits, we have a seat at the table, and we can use this platform then to both broaden as well as deepen our engagement of the 4 markets. Next slide, please. So this is really my last slide. We talked earlier about how, you know, we have these FTA pathways, and we also want to have other initiatives that complement that. So what we have here, what we've established with the Pacific Alliance is what we call a joint work plan. And this is really meant to guide the kind of collaborative initiatives that we want to work on together as this group of 5 friends. And we do hope that there will be interest on the part of our respective companies to also participate then in these initiatives. The joint work plan is basically structured into 4 pillars. And really these mirror the kinds of interest areas that we have between ourselves. Digital economy, technology and innovation, sustainability, connectivity, logistics and trade facilitation, as well as, you know, business and people links that go into things like education cooperation and capacity building. What do we have in mind under each of these categories? They are very broad categories. And what that really means is there's quite a lot of scope for us to really identify meaningful as well as mutually beneficial projects. So for example, under the digital economy pillar, Chile and Singapore are already parties to what we have called the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement, the DEPA. This is a fairly new kind of trade agreement that parties around the world are starting to sign up to. And it's really meant to harmonize and align our frameworks to enable more seamless cross-border digital trade. So we really do want to expand the benefits of these frameworks with our Pacific Alliance friends. And I'm very, very happy to share that actually Peru has formally applied to join this framework. So we really look forward to that. We want to encourage more of such things amongst the other member states, Mexico as well as Colombia. Under this pillar, we can also talk about innovation partnerships, Latin America as a whole, but I think particularly in the Pacific Alliance markets as well. There's a really dynamic, emerging, innovation and technology startup ecosystem, right? A lot of exciting ideas coming out from there. Similarly, in this region, Singapore is, a very established innovation hub. We think that there's a lot of opportunity for startups, for SMEs, for corporates to come together to find opportunities to co-create and develop new solutions, new products that meet, the new demands of the global market. Under the pillar of sustainability, we're talking about what we can do together to just facilitate each other's respective green transitions. As everyone would know, this is really front and center for many governments now that we have, set out our net zero emissions targets and so on. So under this pillar, I think we could do quite a bit. One idea of which would be, carbon credits collaboration. We have a MOU actually with Peru, where we, are starting that conversation about how we can establish frameworks and a clear approach to jointly generating carbon credits, and then how those credits will be traded, so that ultimately both sides can meet our emissions targets. Under connectivity, logistics, and trade facilitation, this is both in terms of digital connectivity and also physical connectivity, how we can just make, the movements of goods and services faster, more seamless, for our companies. So we're talking about things like, connecting our single windows. We're talking about putting in place the standards and regulations and processes to enable more, for example, agri-food trade. We talked a lot about that this morning. Many of these products are perishable. How do we just ensure that that process is just faster? And finally, in terms of business and people links, again, a very broad topic, but we think that there's a lot of opportunity here to talk about student exchanges, corporate attachments, and so on, just to kind of build our collective understanding and familiarity between the Pacific Alliance and Singapore. So I just want to end here. I think, in a nutshell, we are very committed to our relationship with the Pacific Alliance. It's a very exciting, progressive bloc in Latin America. We really do want to do more. The Free Trade Agreement, as I mentioned, is in the works. It has been signed last year in January, and to date, Singapore as well as Peru have ratified the agreement. What we need is one more Pacific Alliance member state to ratify it before it can come into force for the three parties in the first instance. What I've also shared then would be this joint work plan. Again, it's a way to facilitate these conversations that we would like to have with the Pacific Alliance, and we do welcome suggestions as well as ultimately the participation of our companies to get these projects going. So thank you very much. That's my presentation for today, and back to you, SBF.
Yeah, thank you so much, Valerie, for the presentation, and also the esteemed presenters for those informative sessions. Yeah, before we commence the Q&A, we would like to request your participation in the end of webinar poll, which you can see on your screen. Your feedback is valuable to us and will help us enhance future webinars. Please take a moment to complete it. Thank you. Yeah, so We are now opening the floor to our attendees we have some questions, but in the interest of time, we will direct the questions specifically to the speakers. We'll go with one question per speaker. We'll start with Mr. Carlos Posada. There's a question for Mr. Carlos, is that in terms of identifying partners, what is the best approach to identify potential partners or collaborators in Peru?
Well, actually, thank you for the question. In the case of Peru, it's very important to approach to the business guild to identify potential partners, not only from abroad, but also potential partners in Peru, in this case, where we can, identify specific sectors, companies, and of course, logistical coverage for increasing trade between two parties, in this case, Singapore and Peru. For example, the Lima Chamber of Commerce or the National Association for Exporters are guilds where you can find the support to identify potential opportunities for making business. In the other hand, I would say that in the, let's say, general terms, and of course, taking into account the public sectors of both countries, is very important to note the complementary aspects from both countries. Let's say, for example, time frames or window frames that we can identify during the year to be complementary, for example, in agricultural products or in the mining sector, considering the necessities both parties might have to boost manufacture and to boost, production sectors. And in third line, I would say it's very important to have this regulation coverage under FTA, regulations. The idea of having FTA regulations is to reap off the benefits that both sides might have. This FTA situation, these FTA agreements, will give you these preferences that will and importers, exporters to have this advantage in terms of productivity and competitiveness that you might not have if you don't have this bilateral relation under the coverage of free trade agreements. So my last advice would like to be to analyze and identify very clearly the FTAs into force from those countries where you would like to import or export, and identify specific benefits those agreements might have regarding the sectors you are interested at.
Thank you, Mr. Posada. The next question is for Liz and Grace. Is regarding the, could you elaborate on the trade potential between Peru and Singapore under the agreements that you mentioned? And how could the businesses benefit from this? Yeah.
Thanks, Hock Chye. I will actually give it back to Grace because she had touched on this in her presentation earlier. Grace?
Sorry, I had to unmute my mic.
Yeah, sorry. I should have texted you beforehand. Yeah, I think it's
no
better
worries.
for you.
Yeah. The opportunities. Well, I presented some opportunities just to recap a little. Opportunities provided by Singapore include our network of FTAs. We have 27 FTAs that you could tap on. Singapore is also a financial hub and gateway to the Southeast Asian market. And like I said, Singapore is also one of the, it is actually the largest, busiest container transshipment port, handling more than 30 million TEUs annually. So these are some opportunities Peruvian companies can tap on in Singapore, and Singaporean companies can look into Peru's agriculture opportunities. So Mr. Posada mentioned massive growth prospects in terms of agricultural exports like bananas, organic coffee, cocoa. There's also a lot of opportunities in terms of infrastructure, especially in terms of industrial development, clean water and waste management, and developing urban transport. So that may be something that our development companies might want to look at. And in terms of IT, innovation and technology, there are many digital solutions nowadays that we could share information on, as well as work towards. We can work towards advancements in terms of agri-tech, transport systems, intelligent transport systems, and e-government services as well. So yeah, I hope
I'll
that
just add just 2 points which I brought up earlier. You know, when you're bringing in the Peruvian agriculture products, see how you can incorporate it into as ingredients into products that you are doing. So just talking about bananas, you know, in this part of the world, we also have a lot of interest in banana chips. So, you know, these are the sort of ways that our companies can think about. You use the Peruvian product, it will qualify then as rules of origin, and then you can further disseminate these banana chips or chocolate chip cookies or whatever it is, or even coffee products into the other TPP countries, or even send back to Peru so that, you know, they can also benefit from some of our cuisine using their products. And then again, on the topic of food, seriously consider restaurants and food services and hospitality, because as everyone has already noted, that region is booming in terms of tourism. And so there are a lot of opportunities for companies willing to just move a bit out of their comfort zone and think out of the box and move in. As I said, I've been to Peru more than 14 times. It's a wonderful country. As with everything, when you're new and you cannot speak the language, just be a bit careful. But the average Peruvian I've met has been very helpful, very friendly. And so I encourage the Singapore companies to venture there and see for yourself.
Thank you so much, Liz and Grace, for your response. The second last question is for Valerie. It's regarding the climate agreement. Like, could you provide an update on the progress of the climate agreement following the signing of the MOU between Peru and Singapore? Thank you. Yeah, sorry, Valerie. Yeah, just to hide, I think we lost you just now due to the internet connection. So the question asked was regarding the climate agreement. Could you provide any update on the progress between for the signing of the MOU between Peru and Singapore?
Thank you. My apologies. I lost connection for a little bit. I hope I can be heard. But yes, Peru and Singapore do have a agreement between us. It's not quite a climate agreement, just to clarify, but it's a memorandum of understanding on carbon credits collaboration. It was signed last November, so November 2022. And that's really the first step to get both countries to come together to collaborate on what we call carbon credits trading, essentially. The next step really after this MOU is to talk about an implementation agreement. But conceptually, the objective here is to facilitate, first of all, joint work on what we call, carbon generating projects. This could be in Peru, it could be in a third country. And some examples would be reforestation projects, waste to energy projects, really initiatives that then generate these credits. And then what this agreement does is to establish a very clear framework that will govern how these credits will be treated, to ensure that there is a high integrity approach to accounting, And when the credits are then traded, for example, from Peru to Singapore, there is no risk of what we call double counting. So basically, if Singapore were to purchase the credits, then on the Peruvian side, we need to make sure that the numbers on that end are reduced. And really, the intention here is to come together as part of a larger global community to ensure that collectively we ultimately meet our net zero emission targets. We are all committed to doing this under the Paris Agreement. So this really comes under that framework. So the answer really to the question is we have an MOU currently. We are in the process of finalizing and then talking about an implementation agreement. And at that stage, I think we would be ready to really have that clarity as to how this arrangement would work in practice.
Yeah, thank you so much, Valerie, for the sharing. We have our last question to Mr. Carlos. So the question is this, for Mr. Posada. Singapore is one of the major contributors to foreign direct investment in the world, but only a small portion of this investment is concentrated in Latin America. In recent years, there's been a growing interest in Latin America with numerous visits from authorities and businesses, and a particular focus on regional blocs such as the Pacific Alliance and Mercosur. In the event that this leads to increased investments from Singapore in the region, why should Singaporean companies choose Peru over the other countries in the region to concentrate their investments? Mr. Posada. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm going to be very brief, but I would say that Peru is a very, very interesting place to increase investment in the region. Peru has more than 20 FTAs into force now. We practically have all America covered by FTAs into force now, from Canada to Chile to Argentina. We do have all the regulations into force. All our agreements have chapters for protecting and have stable and predictable rules for investors. And of course, we have a macroeconomic environment that will allow any investor to have a safe investment in our country, but also from Peru, reach the South American region, Central American region, and of course, have preferential access to Northern American countries. That doesn't mean that we can move on also on regulations within the Pacific Alliance. 4 countries are focused in the same targets for increasing investment, direct foreign direct investment, but also increased trade between the 4 countries and from the 4 countries to Asia Pacific countries. So I would say the environment is the correct one, and Peru will be more than happy to have more direct investment from Singapore and from Peru to the region.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Posada. It makes me also want to invest in Peru, actually, from your sharing. But thank you so much for everyone's active participation. Due to the interest of time, we're not able to answer all the queries. We apologize for that. However, we will try to respond to you. You can drop us an email if you have more queries. So once again, thank you so much, everyone, for your active participation. We hope you have found these discussions enlightening and have provided valuable insights to the opportunities and collaborations that lie ahead. We look forward to future engagements like this, and please feel free to reach out to us. And if you are keen to be updated on upcoming events, please also join our mailing list. So we would like to bring this event to a close, and thank you so much, everyone. And we'd like to warmly thank the speakers for your valuable time. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much. Liz, it was nice to see you. Thank you very much.
Yes, we should catch up. Thank you, Carlos.
Let's stay in touch. Thank you very much. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Grace. Thank you, Valerie. Thank you, Mr. Hogg. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.